It's Dudley Rutherford here with Godly Goosebumps, and thank you for joining us again on our podcast. We love telling stories that only God can orchestrate. And today we have a story that some of you, if you've not heard of the story, you might not believe it, but it's, again, a classic illustration of when you see God moving in someone else's life, then you know that God can move any mountain and that God can move in anybody's life. Want to encourage you to hit that share button and the subscribe button on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Help us get the word out about these incredible stories. Today, my in-studio guest is really a good friend of mine, Caleb Kaltenbach.
Hey, Pastor Dudley.
And Caleb, thanks for coming in on the pod. What do you think of our podcast room here, brother?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Second of all, I love it. You've got all the elements of LA. You've got UCLA. You don't let USC people in here. We're good.
Yeah, nothing in here USC because there's reasons for that. But we'll talk about that later. No, we love all the people from USC because they need the Lord.
They do.
They do. But
they do.
Caleb is actually on our staff here at Shepherd Church. And if you don't know of our church, we're in Los Angeles, the greater Los Angeles area, kind of the little northwest corner there in the San Fernando Valley. We have several campuses here in LA. And last weekend, I have been here for 35 years, which tells you how old I am. But Caleb, many years ago, just kind of showed up on our doorstep. I'm trying to think what that would be like. It's like a stray cat almost. He just kind of showed up. Nobody knew who he was. No one knew his story. We tried to shoo him away. He wouldn't go away. He just kept coming back to the church and basically is on staff now at the Great Shepherd Church.
Shepherd Church is like catnip to me. I can't leave.
Okay. Well, I guess that's a good analogy. But I do want to share your story because your story is really unbelievable, but especially in our times today in which we're living. But Caleb, you were raised as a little kid by gay parents. Your parents, well, here's what I know, and I'll let you fill in the details. You're here, so you had a normal mom and dad at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And they ended up both getting a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And then they both end up having gay partners.
Right.
And then you kind of were raised going back and forth. I want you to go back to the beginning and tell your story about how you grew up and what you remember as a child growing up.
Absolutely. My parents were both professors in Columbia, Missouri, at the University of Missouri, Columbia, and Stevens College. They were divorced when I was 2, and they both went into same-sex relationships. My dad was in several different relationships just with friends, but my mom went into a 22-year monogamous relationship with a woman named Vera. They moved to Kansas City, the home of the greatest NFL team ever. And there they became activists. They joined the local board of directors for GLAAD. And I grew up going with them to clubs and bars and pride parades and house parties and so on and so forth. And I saw how some people professed to be Christian, how ugly they were. And they just, at parades, they would say, Jesus doesn't love you. He doesn't want you. They would throw water and urine on people. And I thought to myself, man, I never want to be a Christian because if Christians are this bad, I can't imagine how awful Jesus Christ is.
Okay, before you start bashing the Christians.
Well, no, they weren't Christians, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, before you start bashing the people who think they're Christians, I want to go back to you were raised by 2 gay women in a relationship.
Right.
And kind of the fear that we have, that people have, is that that's not healthy for a child to grow up with 2 moms or 2 dads. God created a child that need a male role model and a female role model. You didn't have any of that. You grew up with 2 moms. And when you were growing up, is that all that you knew? Did that seem normal to you? Did you think that was normal? Did you feel it was normal?
You know, I had my dad over here and I had my 2 moms, and I thought that it was normal until I got up to about middle school. Then I had a little bit better friends, and none of them had 3 gay parents. And so for me, I didn't want anybody to know, but I guess, yeah, I'm a shining example of turning out normal.
And so you grew up in this household three gay parents, basically.
In 2 houses, yeah.
And you were saying before I rudely interrupted you, they used to take you to some of these gay pride parades and things, and you felt like they were being mistreated.
Yeah, because at the end of these parades, there would be some people who professed to be Christians. Maybe they were, but now thinking back at it, I don't see the love of Christ in them. They would hold up signs saying, "God hates you, no room for you."
Okay.
When people from my mom's and Vera's parade would go try to talk to them, they would get doused with water and urine. And, I think we really underestimate how much our words and the way we treat people will either encourage them to follow Jesus or discourage them. And in my case, I thought to myself, Christians hate gay people. If you're not like them, they won't like you. And I just wanted nothing to do with Christians.
Okay. So, and you're in Missouri. You're in Kansas City?
In Kansas City and Columbia, Missouri.
Yeah. And what happens as far as when somehow you switched and actually became a Christian? So tell us about that transition, that good transition there.
Absolutely. I got invited to go to a Bible study. A friend of mine in high school who was a Christian when I was in the 10th grade asked me to go to his Bible study at his house, and he was leading a Bible study for other high schoolers, and I thought, this is going to be perfect. I'm going to go and pretend to be a Christian, and I'm going to dismantle their faith. And obviously that plan turned out real well. But when I was in the 10th grade, I had never stepped foot in a Christian household before.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to insult some of you who are listening or watching this. I'm kind of describing my house a little bit now, and maybe some of yours, but not to the degree that these people were. It looked like they had raided a Bible bookstore when you walked in. They had the Christian breath mints to the side. Testaments, I don't know if you've ever tried. Don't try them.
Okay.
Don't try them. They had all the Bible bookstore pictures, and I just thought to myself, why would somebody have a framed picture of a lion and a sheep on their wall with Bible verses? I'd never seen anybody have a framed...
Maybe a lamb?
Yeah, it was probably a lamb, but I had never seen somebody have a framed picture of an animal on their wall like that.
Okay.
Then my friend came up from the basement and said, we've circled up downstairs. Won't you join us? And I thought, this is the beginning of a horror movie. So I went down there. They told me to, read from 1 Corinthians. I think it was chapter 9. I couldn't find it. I didn't know that the Bible had a table of contents. So I read, unfortunately, a verse from 1 Chronicles about some dude getting impaled.
Okay.
And they're like, where are you? And I said, 1 Chronicles. They said, oh, you're in the Old Testament. I said, is there a new one? I had no idea we had updated 2.0. And by going there and trying to prove them wrong, God actually proved my worldview wrong. And eventually, I gave my life to him and I got baptized.
Okay, I'm trying to get my arms wrapped around this story. So you become a Christian in high school.
Yep.
And at that time, does anything change in the relationship with your folks at all?
Definitely, because at the age of 16, I had to come out to my 3 gay parents. And I had changed my view of sexuality and sex to what I believe today. That God designed sex to be expressed in a marriage between a male and a female, a man and a woman, husband and wife.
And again, I'm going back to how we imagine kids being raised by gay parents, which I don't know because I wasn't raised that way. But so there was a light that came on that said that this wasn't right and that this was the way God created us to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so you go to your parents and you try to explain this to them. And how'd they receive that?
They kicked me out of my houses that I stayed. Both of them. I ended up staying with different friends. One guy named Roy Weiss, you probably remember him.
Yeah.
Back in the day, stayed with him and Carol for a lot. Yeah, he was a campus minister at the University of Missouri.
The relationship with your folks at that time, was it was estranged, and were you upset about it?
Well, I was upset, but I just read the Bible constantly. I couldn't help it. I felt like I had so much time to make up for. And I realized this, Pastor Dudley, that, the more that you fall in love with Jesus, the deeper your relationship, the more room you have to love the unlovable and forgive the unforgivable. Because you have to lean into God's power to forgive and love sometimes. And eventually they let me back in. And then I graduated from high school. I went to Bible college at our alma mater.
Explain how you decided to go to Bible college, and that to become a Christian is one thing. To decide to go to Christian college is a whole different thing.
Well, I felt like God had called me to be a pastor. heard a guy named Robin Sigers preach
Okay,
at a
no,
Christ
Robin.
in Youth CIY conference, and there was something that just clicked with me that night, and I went forward and gave my life to the ministry. It was a week to the day that I was baptized. And I asked him, I asked some other people, where should I go? And they said Ozark, and that's the only college I applied to.
And your parents, your gay parents, when you told them you wanted to be a minister, how did they receive that?
They said, you're going to be homeless on the street. That's what they said. And I said, well, I'll have fun doing it then, I guess. God will be with me.
And so you go off to Bible college, and so then how did you, somehow you get out of college and you ended up at our church, because you went to school back in Missouri.
Right.
And you end up one day, you're on our doorstep like this stray cat we talked about, and you don't go away.
No, I don't go away.
Well, how did you get out to Shepherd?
So one summer I did I'd always wanted to move out to Hollywood. At first I wanted to be an actor,
Okay.
which I don't think that would have gone well. Ever since I saw Christopher Reeve as Superman, but that's another podcast.
Okay.
But I always wanted to go to California, and I asked the president of Ozark at the time, do you know any good churches? And they, he told me Shepherd Church, Shepherd of the Hills. And so I ended up doing an internship with a guy who used to be on staff here named Pete. And you remember Pete Van.
Oh, Pete Van. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember
yeah.
Pete Van.
There you go. And so I did
He's a Kansas City guy, too.
He is a Kansas City guy and an Ozark guy.
Yeah.
And so I ended up doing an internship with him, and then came back here. And I don't know that I really had a job offer. I may have back then, but
Yeah, you just kept showing up.
well, I figured I knew God wanted me to be here. Nobody else knew that, but I was sure. But it's kind of like when I asked my wife to marry her. When I asked my wife to date me, she's like, well, God hasn't told me yet. I said, well, he will.
He will.
He will.
I guess he did.
He did. He did. She couldn't control her urges. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
There you go.
Thank you for sharing that tidbit of information. I want to go back, Caleb, to one of the most amazing things about your entire story. Not that you were raised by gay parents and that you became a Christian, that you go to Bible college and you end up working at our staff. Tell us about your parents ended up becoming Christians.
Yeah, so I worked here for 11 years, and I went to go be a senior pastor out in Dallas, Texas, a.k.a. Purgatory. And while I was there, before I had moved there, my mom's partner had died of cancer. And unless a miracle happened, Vera did. Unless a miracle happened, she went to go face God without Jesus, unfortunately. But my mom went through a huge depression. They'd been together 22 years or something. And when we moved down to Dallas, my dad and mom moved down there separately of one another, which I thought was weird. I had never lived within a 10-mile radius of both my parents. And then they said, do you want to come to church? They said, can we go to your church? And I said, man, I would love for you to, but you know what?
They asked you if they could go to your church.
Yes, sir. And I said, I'd love for you to. But you know what I believe about sex and sexuality? I mean, I don't preach on it all the time. I'm not a creeper, but still, you know what I believe? And they said, yeah. And I said, all right, come on over. And the church was nicer to them than I am. I mean, do you know how annoying it is when the church is nicer to your parents than you are? And you're like, whatever. Anyway, that's a whole nother podcast. We're not going to get into my psyche there. So probably about 2 or 3 weeks before my family and I moved back to Southern California, at the ages of 79 and 80, my mom and dad gave their lives to Jesus, and they trusted him.
Unbelievable.
And when I asked them how, here's what they said in so many words. People treated us like people, not like projects. And that made all the difference in the world. And so that's what I remember about that.
And are your folks still alive today, your mom and your dad?
Yeah. My mom has cancer again. She's in Dallas, Texas, in assisted living. And my dad is in assisted living out in Simi, but unfortunately right now he's got some major kidney issues, so he's in ICU in the hospital. And he has dementia. But both of them do love the Lord, and I'm grateful.
Praise the Lord for that. And Caleb, you ended up coming on our staff, and because of your life and the way you were raised, and because of what you believe, and because of what's happening in our culture, which is becoming more and more gender confused, and in my opinion, has really gone away from biblical moral principles as far as the nation goes. You've kind of become the spokesman in the country and literally in the world. I don't know anybody who does a better job than you or more requested than you to go into churches and organizations, Christian organizations for the most part, and to talk about healthy sexuality and talk about the issues that churches face in handling people that are gay, and as the church tries to reach out to them and bring them into the kingdom, there's all these nuances with how much do you let a couple that's openly gay involved in a church as far as leadership positions go and staff positions and whether or not staff should be doing weddings or things of this nature. You've written a couple of books on these subjects. One is called Messy Grace and one is called Messy Truth. So I want you to take just a moment and talk about the ministry. I believe that God has called you to this ministry, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you have that feeling as well, right?
Yes, sir.
I want you to explain a little bit about these books and your ministry and what God has called you to do, and what do you think your place is in our world today?
Well, first of all, the first book, Messy Grace, is about how do you love when you have a personal relationship, whether it's a family member or friend, with somebody who identifies or relates as LGBTQ. How do you love them, and how do you engage that personal relationship without sacrificing your theological convictions?
Okay.
About marriage, relationships, sexuality, so on and so forth. Messy Truth, on the other hand, I wrote kind of as a complement to it, and it is all about how do you get your LGBTQ friends and family connected to a Christ-centered church, to a Christ-centered redemptive community.
Okay.
How do you get them plugged in? Because I believe that we find and follow Jesus better with others than all by ourselves and being isolated. So that's kind of gave way for me, and what I do with Christian colleges and seminaries and also churches is I go in there and I help them to create systems and processes that will guard their doctrine and their values, because those should not change, but also create room for people who are in same-sex relationships to attend, and then that also gives way for couples who are heterosexual couples, even who are living together but not married. When they start coming for the first time, I mean, there's some similarities there as well. So, how do you create room without compromising your values, and how do you live in that tension of grace and truth? Which is why one book is Messy Grace and the other book is Messy Truth.
And these books, I mean, I've read them. They're biblically rooted. The things that you talk about, these issues, which are hotly debated, come from a biblical perspective, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, I do.
And your ministry, as you travel around, do you feel like you're being welcomed as you share this information, or do you feel like you're hated? Are you loved? Are you?
I think for the most part, especially when I go to churches, it's welcome, because a lot of those churches have gotten to a place where they think to themselves, either we need to take a stronger stance on the truth part, or we need to, be more gracious without sacrificing our convictions. I've been blessed and also burdened to both. Every blessing can be a burden too, to be able to help Christian universities and seminaries and Bible colleges with LGBTQ students. I've gotten a number out of lawsuits with students. But there are a couple of schools that I'm involved with right now where the students are in these schools and these Christian universities are very, very, they don't see Christ as being their primary identity. It can be Christ and something else. And so that's when the hostility starts coming out a bit more, because you start stepping on whatever it is they've made their primary identity other than Jesus. And so that's one of the reasons why I tell them, when you make Jesus your primary identity, it's the best decision you ever made, because he guards your identity. He allows you to be an ordinary person through whom which God can do extraordinary things.
You're constantly trying to call people that are in the gay lesbian lifestyle. Are you trying to call them into a biblical straight relationship, or are you?
No. Here's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to call them into being both people who are LGBTQ and people who are, heterosexual too. I want them to be fully devoted followers of Jesus.
Okay.
And when he becomes the Lord of your life, then you have to really question, if I am really going to follow Jesus, then am I going to value sexual integrity? Am I going to value sexual purity or not? And so, I've told people a lot that my biggest goal is to help people to become devoted followers of Jesus. And for some people, that does mean celibacy. But I think that if they go to a really good church like Shepherd Church, one of the things that Christians do, or, that Christians who are not LGBTQ, a burden that we need to take, a joyous burden, is that for Christians who are celibate, we need to become family to them, because that is a very difficult burden for them to carry.
Yeah.
And they should not carry it alone. So I also challenge churches, how can you become family to these individuals who are making a sacrifice that many of us will never know about? Now, there are some who end up getting married to somebody of the opposite sex, but many who choose that lonely but joyous road of celibacy.
I think the church, the church is bashed all the time.
I agree.
And some of it is, I guess, worthy, or we earned the bashing. But I think I think a lot of it's unfair, because I think, generally speaking, most churches, most ministers, most Christians, we understand our calling to love all people.
I agree.
But it's like, if someone is coming and sitting and going against, it doesn't have to be in the area of sexuality. It could be in many different areas. I've told people, if I was robbing trains and I did that for a living, and I started coming to your church, you'd still love me. But if you truly loved me, you would tell me, Dudley, you got to stop robbing these trains. You're taking something that's not yours. You're gonna get killed one day. You're gonna go to jail. You got to stop robbing trains. And by telling me not to rob trains, that's actually love. Just saying, oh, come on in, have a chair, we love you no matter you robbing trains or not, that can't be our message. Our message is, again, as you said, to point people to Jesus, but at the same time, as we go through scriptures, there's this process of sanctification where we're becoming more and more like Jesus.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more. A couple of things on that. One, I agree. I can't stand it when people bash the church. That's why when I wrote Messy Truth right here, the sequel, the publisher, I kept on using the word Christians have done this, Christians have done that. The publisher would want to change some of those to church, and I'm like, no, we do not insult the bride of Christ.
Yeah.
There are specific Christians that have done this, but not the church. Second thing is this. I agree. You have to reach a point where you call somebody to a deeper level of discipleship, and you call somebody to say, hey, if you're really following Jesus, there's something that needs to change. And I'm not talking about the orientation, I'm talking about the relationship, which is why in Messy Truth I devoted 3 chapters to how do you have a difficult conversation about truth.
Yeah.
Because when you deal with somebody that has an identity issue, where their sexuality is their main identity, they will immediately, if you don't have enough influence with them, they will just not listen. So how do you build that rapport? And then when do you have that tough conversation? And how can you do it in such a way where you call them to holiness?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest issues that we face as a church, and the things that we're most guilty of, is that we select what sins are really, really bad and what sins we just kind of look the other way on.
I agree.
And a lot of that has been in this world, where in this realm where we pick these sins and we think those are the worst. And really, all sin is wrong. Doesn't matter if it's a little sin, big sin. The church, we have to be more consistent. But I do think ultimately the church understands that Jesus Christ came to live,
I agree,
to love, to die for all people, and we should be the conduit by which to point people to Christ.
I agree. We have to share Christ with everyone.
And Caleb, thank you for coming in and sharing your story today. And I want to encourage everybody, if you've never read these books, make sure you get them on Amazon.com or wherever you buy books, and get this book called Messy Grace. This was the first book that he wrote, and really kind of lays the groundwork because, again, and you couldn't come up with two better books, one on grace and one on truth. And these books go together. You really want to read both of them. And how can somebody get a hold of you if they want to get a hold of you and have you come speak at their church?
You can contact me at shepherdchurch.com under the staff. You can go to calebkaltenbach.com or messygracegroup.org.
You know nobody can spell Kaltenbach.
No. Yes, absolutely. Nobody can spell Kaltenbach, but you can go to shepherdchurch.com and
look up at the staff.
You can look up staff.
Look for this beautiful face.
Look for the eye candy.
It's a little bit like Tom Cruise, a little Tom Cruise-ish.
Did you know I turned down the role for Maverick originally in Top Gun?
No, I never knew that.
I told them I'm too busy working for Jesus. I mean, they begged me.
I love that. I love that. Listen, thank you for joining us here today on Godly Goosebumps. And this story of Caleb and his life and his story, his journey, it's just a thrilling story. And I want to encourage you, again, to love as Jesus calls us to love. And we lift up Jesus. Now, that was kind of the gist of that a little bit. And it's really the name of another media department that we have here at the church, where we just exist to lift up Jesus. This Godly Goosebumps, we want to just tell stories of where we've seen Jesus work in people's lives. And obviously, Jesus worked in Caleb's life and then in his parents' life. And there's a way, no matter who people are, where they come from, there's a way to love them, a way to build a bridge, a way to present Christ to them. And then we let the Lord make those changes in that person's life. And Caleb is a great testimony to that. His parents are. Get his book, Messy Grace, Messy Truth. And join us next week on another podcast, Godly Goosebumps. Give us hit that share button or subscribe button, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. Let's get the word out. Let's tell these stories over and over again, stories that only God can orchestrate. We'll see you again here next week on Godly Goosebumps.